Hello, everybody, and welcome to, what's that? Oh my God, it's a brand new show. Welcome to Slash Pick. This is the show where we talk about slasher movies. That's right, I'm your host, DJ Wooldridge. With me, what will be always, is Mr. Adam Hlavac. Hey, man.
What's up? You ready to get murdered?
Dude, so for those that aren't, familiar, Adam likes slasher movies. I like slasher movies. We don't get to talk about them on our main, our main squeezes. And so I hit him up and I was like, dude, you want to do a show talking about slasher movies? And then we're here. That's where we're here. So Adam, for people that maybe, I don't know why this will be the case, but maybe aren't familiar with you or your work, who are you? Where can they find you?
Thanks so much, by the way, for inviting me to do this, because immediately when I saw that email, all I sent back, I think, was like an image of someone raising their hands going, yes.
Yeah.
Because you're right. So I co-host Heroes Reforged with my good friends Augustine and Hector, and we primarily dive into superhero stuff. It's a lot of Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Game of Thrones now a little bit too. And we sprinkle in other things, but it's primarily based in like science fiction fantasy, not even so much comedy, not so much action.
Yeah.
The action is obviously part of the science fiction fantasy bit, but we really do not dive into horror. We did some watch-alongs of some of the Halloween films, and it's probably some of the lowest performing stuff on our channel.
Yeah.
And I have been looking for a reason or an outlet or something to talk about horror. I talk about a lot on my social media. So this was such a perfect opportunity to talk about it because, yeah, it's true. I really do love horror. I love slasher movies. I have a pretty extensive Halloween. This right here, this is from all the way from Italy. All the way from Italy.
Wow.
And I have the Shout. You can't really see it. It's kind of blurry on the camera. But, I have some of the Shout Factory remasters and all that stuff. So, yeah. I was super stoked to do this, and this is really fun. And like you were saying, our main squeezes, we don't really get to talk about this. So I'm super stoked. And I'm hoping, and I think this will definitely be the case, that I will also discover new horror, or it'll inspire me to go watch other stuff too, which I always need an excuse for. Because, being in the superhero, those big IP universes for too long, sometimes I'm like, I need a break. I need one for me. I need something that I love, something that gets my whistle wet. Yeah. So I'm excited to be here.
Totally. 100%. I totally agree with you because we love that stuff. We love the superhero stuff. We love the genre stuff. But like you were just saying, it's good to shake it up a little bit. And we're shaking things up over at OSA. We're expanding into more of a podcast network with a bunch of different shows. And so this is going to be a monthly show that we do where we're going through slasher movies year by year, kind of charting the trajectory of the genre. And like you, I'm actually, I think there's more opportunity for you to expose me to new things because I don't know what your history is. I'm actually comparatively new to watching slasher movies. I grew up in a relatively conservative home. And it was one of those things that I had a lot of friends that I grew up in the type of community where I had friends that would watch R movies and they'd be like, well, it's just R for violence. Like, God forbid you see a titty, but if somebody gets their head cut off, that's fine. And, but my parents were like, are you 17? Then you're not seeing an R-rated movie. That's not, we're going to wait till you get older. And so I didn't see a lot of slasher movies or horror movies until college. Unfortunately, I had a very good friend that was a huge horror fan and kind of fast-tracked me through a bunch of stuff. So a lot of the movies we're going to be covering, a lot of even the bigger franchises, I haven't seen some of the early installments of. I've only caught bits and pieces and stuff like that. So the movie we're talking about today, I've seen before, but sometimes it'll be brand new to me. And when we were originally talking about it, you're like, don't forget about this movie or don't forget about that movie. It's like that; those weren't even on my radar. So this is going to be a really fun journey for me. But what about you? What was your been your experience with slasher movies, and what was the first slasher movie you saw, you think?
Yeah, so I would say that my experience with slashers, I think, are the ones I've been exposed to the most.
Yeah.
And then
they're pretty ubiquitous.
Next to that would probably be monster horror.
Yeah.
But yeah, slashers have been a really big part of my childhood and growing up and stuff, which, a very opposite situation from you. But, I saw Halloween. I think that was my first slasher pick that I ever saw. I think I was 8 or 9. I was very young, very, very young. And, you know, from there, once you discover Halloween, it's very easy to stumble into the rest. Friday the 13th, Scream, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, all of that stuff. So I watched a lot of that stuff pretty early on throughout my childhood.
Yeah.
And I think slashers were the ones I gravitated towards the most, simply because my first sort of exposure to horror was Halloween. So I think for a while growing up, I had made the assumption in my head that like, oh, horror is, I think I falsely kind of assumed that the horror genre was primarily slasher. But, you know, as we know now, there's obviously like so many different subgenres of horror. But yeah, so Halloween was the first one that had like the biggest impact on me. And I think to this day, may still be my favorite.
It's a good one. Big John Carpenter fans in this house. So big supporter of Halloween. And yeah, and I think especially when you and I were coming up, slashers were I think it's easy to say they were the most successful. You know, we're talking about 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Right. It's like, yeah, that's where if you're making a horror movie, that's where you make your money, baby. Totally. And we're going to be seeing that trajectory. But before we get into today's movie, I did want to tell everybody that whether you're watching this live, which you can do that over at patreon.com/onlystupid-answers. I'll also be getting it pretty early too. Or you're watching it when it goes up on YouTube. My Kickstarter for the Hellbent Complete Edition is live right now, but only for a few more days. We are on the tail end of this campaign. Be sure that you do not miss out, because not only do we have this 170-page, high-quality, soft-cover graphic novel, but plenty of other rewards. So go to hellbentcomicbook.com. Back it. So this is the complete collection of all 3 volumes of Hellbent. If you've never checked it out before, this is the perfect time to get the entire story. And if you're here, that means you're probably a horror fan, which means you'll probably love Hellbent, because it's kind of like a horror supernatural thriller book. If you've gotten the previous volumes, there will be brand new stories in this collection. So whether you're new to the series or never checked it out before, there is something for everybody. So please go support that over at hellbentcomicbook.com. And I'm not above shilling this way. I got a baby on the way, you know, so I could use, you know, a little extra support is all I'm saying. It would be nice. And I already mentioned the Patreon, and tell your friends about the show. Gosh dang it. We're really excited to keep doing this, but where are we going to start our slasher journey? Where is the patient zero? And I know, actually, I don't know this. You know, horror fans, I think, tend to be a little bit more welcoming than other genres. So I was, in my mind, I had this hypothetical person like, well, actually, I don't know that we're going to be getting that so much, but I know there were things prior to this movie that influenced this movie, but when it came to deciding like a good starting point for slasher movies, I couldn't think of a better one than 1960s Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. The synopsis for this is: a secretary on the run for embezzlement takes refuge at a secluded California motel owned by a repressed man and his overbearing mother. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good synopsis. On Rotten Tomatoes, this has 97%. With an audience score of 95%. It was directed by Alfred Hitchcock and written by Joseph Stefano, based off the novel by Robert Bloch. Adam, what's your relationship with Psycho? What's your experience with Psycho?
Great question. Psycho is actually one of those films that I saw pretty late in my teens. I had known about it. I feel like most people who are fans of movies know Psycho. Yeah. They may not know what the movie's about. They may not even know who the actors are in it, but that shower scene, that music, that scream, I feel like no matter what your level of film comprehension or understanding is, you know of that movie just from that scene in particular. Yeah. Even when you go to Universal Studios, you know, you've seen the Bates Motel, you've seen the house, you know, you understand that this movie is a significant part of film history. But so for me, like that was kind of how I knew Psycho. Was I knew it from its classic moments. Yeah. I knew it because I used to go to Universal Studios all the time. Yeah. But I hadn't maybe seen it until I was probably in high school. And I think there was a subconscious part of my brain that avoided that movie because I thought it was going to be extremely terrifying. Yeah. But
that's how they marketed it.
That's how they marketed it. Yeah. But when I saw it, I think I was just incredibly intrigued by the way that the story was told. Yeah. So, and I've really come to love the movie so much, and it is definitely like top tier. And it's even kind of weird to call it a slasher horror film because I feel like that is such a small element of the movie and the rest is very much a thriller. And I feel like that way about a lot of slasher stuff, but you know, we'll get into that.
Yeah,
later.
we'll get into that. And one of the things I think it's interesting to start here and to see where things go, because it is funny rewatching it, how comparatively tame it all is. It really is a psychological thriller. 90% of the movie, I'd argue, 80 to 90% is really inside people's brain and what they think they can get away with and how they're trying to get away with something. And rewatching it for this, I'd seen it before, but rewatching it for this, you know, there's been a few times where, especially since I was catching up on a bunch of stuff, you hear something like Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is a seminal movie. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. Some people argue it's the best movie of all time. You're like, yeah. So by the time you get to see it, you're like, this is going to be underwhelming because I've been oversold it. And then you watch and you're like, wait, actually, this movie's really good. That's happened to me a couple times. It happened to me with Citizen Kane. It happened to me with Watchmen when I read Watchmen for the first time. And rewatching it, it's like, oh yeah, this movie's really good. Psycho's really good. Oh my goodness. Because yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I totally agree with you because there are a lot of those types of movies that you think, oh, well, I'm sure they're good to the people who watched them growing up.
Yeah.
Because that's all they knew growing up. But it is really refreshing when you jump into a movie, like you're saying, Citizen Kane or Psycho, and it still holds up. Like I was watching the movie with my girlfriend. She hadn't seen it in about 20 years.
Yeah.
And we were watching it. And there's definitely moments where you're watching, you're going, this actor is playing this so suspect, so like on the nose, and I'm going, how?
People are awful at covering their tracks in this movie.
Yeah, I'm like, you're doing it, but you know, but there are other characters that they play against that you can tell those characters are like, yo, you're being real weird and real sus.
Yeah.
And I love it for that. So yeah, there's like so much of that, but it is really refreshing to watch a movie. You know, at this point, 1960, it's so long ago.
Yeah.
You know,
60 years.
What is that? 64 years.
Yeah.
It still plays incredibly well.
Well, and I think there's a lot of things working towards it, and I think we'll be discussing that. But first, let's get a snapshot because not all of our movies will be as timeless as this one is. So just to get people back into that mindset, this movie is made in 1960. So let's go into our little terror time machine and take a look at what was going on in 1960. So in 1960, JFK announces his candidacy for the Democratic presidential nomination. Just for a little context of this show, we are recording this after the first presidential debate of 2024. And so that 1960 with JFK versus Richard Nixon, and it's just, you know, it's just interesting context. Anyway, that's it. So in March 6th, in the Vietnam War, the United States announces 3,500 American soldiers will be sent to Vietnam. Vietnam is going to be popping up. When we do this segment on Terror Time Machine, Vietnam's going to keep coming up. The 32nd Academy Award ceremony, hosted by Bob Hope, was held on April 4th. Ben-Hur wins 11 awards. So just for context of what...
Wow.
We've got Psycho, and meanwhile, Ben-Hur sweeping awards. So you know what kind of movies. Yeah. Speaking of this, in 1960, some of the biggest movies of 1960 were Swiss Family Robinson. Number 2 was Psycho, the movie we're about ready to talk about. Spartacus, Exodus, just to give you kind of an idea of the other types of movies that were being made at this time. May 6th, President Dwight Eisenhower signs the Civil Rights Act of 1960. Let's see what we got here. Just this was funny to me. May 16th, Theodore Maiman operates the first laser. Ooh,
lasers.
June 16th is where this movie came out. July 11th, Harper Lee releases her critically acclaimed novel To Kill a Mockingbird.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Huh.
Where did that end up?
Yeah. How did that turn out? Did it do okay? That's crazy. So that we didn't even. Actually, I was going to say we didn't even have a movie, but I actually don't know. Maybe the movie came out around the time of the book. You know, because sometimes they option those books prior to them being released. September 5th, 1960 Summer Olympics. Cassius Clay wins gold medal for boxing. September 30th, the animated sitcom The Flintstones airs its first episode on ABC.
Oh my God.
Yep.
Oh my God.
And November 8th is the... It's crazy. At the beginning of the year, JFK announces his candidacy. By the end of the year is the election. Oh, wow. Your election was only 1 year. Oh, my God. Your election cycle only lasted 1 year. I'm jealous. In a close race, Democratic Senator John F. Kennedy is elected over Republican Vice President Richard Nixon. He's the youngest man elected to office. JFK is at 43. December 11th, MGM's The Wizard of Oz airs a rerun on CBS of Wizard of Oz, only a year after its previous telecast, thus beginning the tradition of annual telecasts.
I can't imagine that one must have been so rare back then.
Well, yeah, and it's weird. The reason I put this in there is because then they started doing it yearly, and it's just funny that like it's the first rerun. It's the first time. Like, what if we? I don't know if it's the first one.
60.
Yeah.
God, the movie was made in 39, I think.
Yep. And now it's like it's now we have to explain to kids. There used to be this thing called like television, all right, where it was broadcast into your home. You didn't get to pick what you watched. It was whatever they were putting on at that time, and you had to like tune in. It's crazy.
What's a rerun?
Yeah, what's
You'll
a
find
rerun?
out.
Oh my God. So a little behind the scenes of this movie. Psycho is based off Robert Bloch's 1959 novel of the same name, loosely inspired by the case of convicted Wisconsin murderer and grave robber Ed Gein. And just like Vietnam will come up repeatedly, Ed Gein, put a pin on that name. For these slasher movies, he's going to be a touchstone for many of them.
Yep.
Apparently, hold on. So Gein, who lived only 40 miles away from Bloch, which is wild. Yeah, so a little bit about Gein, because he is going to come up a lot. He was also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, or the Plainfield Ghoul, and was an American murderer, suspected serial killer, and body snatcher. In 1957, authorities discovered that he had exhumed corpses from local graveyards and fashioned keepsakes from their bones and skin. He also confessed to killing 2 women, tavern owner Mary Hogan in 1954 and hardware store owner Bernice Worden in 1957. And that is something you'll see with a lot of these movies, that real life serial killers are not quite as prolific as the slashers we're going to be covering. Which good for us in the real world. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So Peggy Robertson, Hitchcock's longtime assistant, read a review about Psycho and handed it to Hitchcock, who wanted to make he acquired the rights to the novel for $9,500.
That's crazy.
And reportedly ordered Robertson to buy all copies to preserve the novel's surprises. Paramount did not want to make Psycho. So something else to keep in mind, and I'm bringing up history stuff. This is not a history podcast. All right. So this is just, I'm just giving you kind of a sense of the time frame that we're in.
Context.
Yeah. So we used to have this thing called the studio system, right? And so Hitchcock was on contract to make, I think it was 2 more movies for Paramount. And he had a few, what we would now call blockbusters, like with big name stars, a few things in the pipeline, and he was sick of it. Dang it. He wanted to do something. He wanted to do Psycho. And the studio was like, no, thank you. A movie that follows a serial killer, not 1960.
We're too prestigious for that.
Yeah. So here was his offer. Hitchcock offered to shoot it quick and cheap in black and white. So these black and white, the color movies were around at this time. You just mentioned Wizard of Oz was like, what, 20 years before this?
Yeah.
He offered to use Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV crew. He had a TV show at the time. If you're familiar with The Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock Presents was the Alfred Hitchcock version of that. He waived his $250,000 director's fee in lieu of a 60% stake in the film negative and filmed it at Universal with Paramount distributing. I would imagine Paramount is still kicking themselves over this one to this day. Nobody that made this decision is alive anymore, and they're still like, God damn it, we could have had Psycho. Yeah. Also, I want to put a pin in his $250,000 director's fee, because there's a sum of money in the movie that one assumes is a lot of money at the time.
Oh yeah.
And even then, Hitchcock's getting paid $250,000 to make movies.
Yeah. I think we did the math on that, and it was like, I think today it's like $400,000. The 40,000.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I'd steal that money. Let's steal it. So this is a good example of how the United States films in the United States are coming out of the production code, or what is commonly called the Hays Code. There was like a rules about what you could or could not present in movies, and Psycho pretty much breaks all of them.
Totally.
It was unprecedented in its depiction of sexuality and violence. And I know if you're watching it in 2020 eyes, you're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, you know, the 60s. Right from the opening scene, which we'll get to in a second. In the production code standards of the times, unmarried couples shown in the same bed would have been taboo. I think I have a note later. Yeah. Another cause for concern for the censors was that Marion was shown flushing a toilet with its contents, torn up notepaper, fully visible. No flushing toilet had appeared in mainstream film and television in the United States at the time.
I did not know that. That is the most obscure, weird, so strange. What were we doing back then?
Yep. Obviously, he had to do a lot of the censors wanted him to do cuts specifically around the shower scene, but basically, he submitted the movie, and some of the, like half of the censors, I'm going to say, were like, wait, I think I can see a titty. You need to recut it. And so he took it. He's like, fine. This is the story. I don't know how true this is. I'm just relaying the stories that I found. Resubmitted it. Didn't change anything. And then, like, basically they switched. People who didn't think they saw something now saw something, and people who said they saw something said, good job fixing it. So he kept it the way it was. They didn't change it.
That sounds like working in visual effects.
Huh? Yep. Anybody that's gotten creative notes knows that feeling. It was the first film sold in the U.S. on the basis that no one would be admitted to the theater after the film started. So I was not familiar with this. Like, obviously, like, they don't like you coming in late. But, like, I think from reading this anecdote, like, the movie could be half done. Because Hitchcock's note was like, I don't want people coming in and not seeing Marion's scenes. And I'm like, oh, that's what you mean by coming in late. That people would come in, like, halfway before the movie's over and not know the first half of the movie. So it's like, yeah, that's like, different.
What am
I
watching?
Yeah. It's just a different time. And it makes sense when you think about, like, early, like, serials and stuff like that. Like, you would just pop in, like, oh, it's hot outside. Let's go in and see what's playing on the...
Totally. Well, and I think, like, you know, it's also not a very long movie. I think it's like an hour and 40-ish minutes. So, yeah, I could totally see that, like you're saying, in the days of, like, serials, and you could totally just pop in and just walk into whatever, and you're like, sure, I'll walk into this thing. Why not? And then have absolutely no context as to what's happening in the film. Yeah,
and a good example of that, that off the top of my head, obviously there's probably better ones, but I think about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where Margot Robbie... is, you know, sees the movie that she's in is playing, and she's like, hey, just let me in. And it's like the movie's like halfway, you know, it's halfway in.
Yeah.
Hitchcock did most of the promotion himself, forbidding Leigh and Perkins to make the usual television, radio, and print interviews for fear of them revealing the plot. Even critics were not given private screenings, but rather had to see the film with the general public, which may have affected their reviews. The film's original trailer features a jovial Hitchcock taking the viewer on a tour of the set, wild, different time, and almost giving away the plot details before stopping himself. And because Janet Leigh was no longer available for filming, Hitchcock had Vera Miles don a blonde wig and scream loudly as he pulled the shower curtain back in the bathroom sequence of the preview. Because the title Psycho instantly covers most of the screen, the switch went unnoticed by audiences for years. However, freeze frame analysis clearly reveals that it is Miles and not Leigh in the shower during the trailer.
Wild times.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, I think a lot of that stuff, I don't know if it still does, but I feel like a lot of that stuff would always play at Universal too. When you're going on like the tram ride, they always had like the ads for all the movies that they would promote on the tram tour ride. Yeah. And every time I remember seeing that old ad for Psycho, and I guess it never clicked with me in my head that it was a different actor, but it would make total sense that if you're trying to, well, it was, I guess in this case, it was kind of an unintentional thing, but it does kind of preserve a lot of what happens in the movie just by switching the actor. Because if you see that ad and you go to the movie, you're like, wait, this is not what I was advertised. But
I just want to see an ad now with like Kevin Feige walking through the set of Avengers Secret Wars and being like, ooh, you know who fights here? I can't tell you, secrets.
Well, and I think it's, you know, obviously marketing has changed tremendously in 64 years, but I think like this almost feels like something a Christopher Nolan would do.
Yeah.
You know, where he's not giving you any insight into the movie. He's keeping it totally vague. He's just giving you a little tour of the set piece. I feel like that's a very Chris Nolan thing to do.
I think
but
you're totally
it's kind
right.
of brilliant.
Yeah,
I love it.
I think you're totally right, because Nolan is I think the closest we have to something like this, like a recognizable, bankable director in this way. The only difference was, and this is not DJ Praise's Alfred Hitchcock podcast, because he's not. The more we've learned about the man, he's not necessarily a guy. I like some of his movies. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But he does have showmanship. He had showmanship. That was part of it. So the fact that, and he also, it's important to note, he did have that Alfred Hitchcock Presents where he was doing the intros of each of those episodes. So he was kind of recognizable. But I don't know, even though that Nolan is the bankable director, does he have the showmanship that he could be like, I'm the ad. I'm the one that's telling you, hey man, no spoilers for Oppenheimer. Don't you read any history books. I'm buying them all up.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get into the movie. All right, right off the top, title cards start hard. Very music's very energetic. We got those like what I'm going to call the split screens, those little like paper
Venetian
shredder
blind.
Yeah. Going back and forth, and I had to remember too that it's like, oh yeah, this is back in the day where we did the credits up front. There's no end. This is where when a movie ended, it just stopped. It was just like the end, cut to black. Yep. No credits, no, we're done.
Totally.
We already did the credits.
Yeah, which I kind of love, honestly. Like, I forgot about that. Like, I get to the end of the thing, and I'm not going to spoil it, but, it just kind of says the end, and then it literally ends. And then the disc menu comes up for Universal, and it's like, thank you for watching today's feature presentation. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Get out of here. Get out of it. Get out of it. We're done with you. Get out of here. So the movie begins, and this is important. It spends a lot of time on this. Phoenix, Arizona beat Friday, December 11th beat at 2:43 p.m. That is where we are starting this movie. Yep. And we are introduced to Marion Crane and Sam Loomis. Oh, Loomis, huh? I wonder if any other movies are going to use that name later, huh? Are living in sin. Adam, they're living in sin.
Naughty naughties. Bunch of naughty naughties, damn them.
She's in her bra. Oh, my God. It's scandalous. They're clearly just lounging on a bed. That's all they're doing, but still, it's too much. And Miriam wants to be respectable. So don't worry, guys. They may be living in sin, but she wants him to make an honest woman out of her. Gosh dang it.
That's right.
She wants to get married, but he's got an ex. Dude, he spends so much time on his ex-wife. Like, God, alimony. This bitch, you wouldn't believe it.
I'm like, Marion, you might need to find someone else. I don't know what to tell you, girl.
Did Loomis, the actor that played Loomis, did he make you think of our new Superman, David Cornsweet? Did you like look at him and I was like, wait, is that Superman over there?
I did not, but the whole time, for whatever reason, the whole time what I was trying to do, though, I was trying to figure out what other movies have I seen him in, because I feel like when I watch Psycho, I mostly remember Vera Miles and Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins.
Understandably.
But John Gavin, who plays Loomis, I like when watching him, like, I feel like I've seen him something before, but I also like, have I seen him in something before? I don't even know, to be honest.
I think he's got resting movie star face. He's like, you look like every leading man at this era of movie. You are one of those guys.
Yeah, and I mean, that was a pretty big year for him, too, because he was also Julius Caesar and Spartacus. So, but like, again, you're watching Psycho and you're not necessarily watching it for that character. You're watching it for literally everybody else.
Well, so and it's funny, too, because I when I was looking at the behind the scenes stuff, I think I had a note of it. Anthony Perkins was apparently a pretty strong, had some big box office returns prior to Psycho, and it's like, that's crazy, because at this point in history, Psycho eclipses all of that. Like, that's the only thing we know Anthony Perkins from.
Oh my God, if you say Anthony Perkins, it's like the first thing that comes out of your mouth is Psycho. There's no question about that.
And it's understandable. We're gonna get into it, but like, he is so good in this movie. Like, you just forget, because you think Psycho's one of those monolithic things, and then it's not until you rewatch it, you're like, wow, he's actually doing really. And what I like about it, I'm going to save till we get there. All right. So back at Marion's work, actually don't know. I don't know what her boss does, but he's talking to a guy about a piece of property. This asshole rich guy that's trying to flirt with Marion, that's going to buy a piece of property for his daughter's wedding. And, you know, if you live in the year of our Lord 2024, let me tell you, he's going to buy this piece of property. One presumes an expensive piece of property for $40,000 cash, baby.
In Phoenix, Arizona.
Which, by the way, yeah, man, don't buy property there. That's like that's one of the hottest places in the entire United States. Don't go there.
When I hear people are moving to Arizona, I don't care where in Arizona, anywhere in Arizona, I'm going, and they're coming from like California or like Oregon or Seattle, or Washington, I'm going, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, man. It was
are you crazy?
I lived in Tucson for a little bit, and we went and visited Phoenix, and it was hot. It was hot, and I was watching a video recently about climate change, and they're like, what's the worst place to live in the United States for climate change? And the answer was Phoenix. Don't go to Phoenix.
Yeah.
Sorry, Phoenix. Okay, so her boss wants her to put the money in the bank because he's going to have the guy write a check. He's like, he doesn't want the cash around, basically.
Yeah, it's the most, I mean, if you think about that, like to walk in and be like, here's $40,000, which is like more or less like a down payment on the property, you're thinking to yourself, like, even in 2024,
yeah,
I don't want 40 grand just like in my pocket
lying
or
around
in my office safe. Come on.
Yeah,
that's obscene.
So he gives it to, wow, it just blanked on the character's name. Marion, sorry. He gives it to Marion to take to the bank. Marion's not going to do that, all right? Because she sees a way out. And by a way out, I guess pay off her boyfriend's debts? Is that what she plans to do with this money?
More or less, yeah. And then whatever's left over, you know, start a new life with.
Dream bigger, Marion. Dream bigger.
Yeah, I know. Which I'm like, damn, that's really generous of you and really dumb at the same time.
So dumb. I mean, everything we see about this guy, it's the 60s. Everything we see about this guy, he seems like a pretty stand-up dude. But, like, don't do that. Keep that money for yourself.
Yeah, I know. I was like, damn, man, you should have just, like, ran. I mean, on your own, which you
although
do, but...
You're right, and I felt the same way, but then you see her capability of running from the law, which is bad. And it's like, you know, you shouldn't have done this. This was a mistake. You're not equipped for this.
Good Lord, so bad.
So
bad.
She's driving away, and she like packs up. She drives away. She tells her boss, like, after I drop this money off, can I just go home? I've got a headache.
You got a headache.
And when she's leaving, she sees her boss, and like instinctively, I actually do like this scene because it feels like something anybody would be like, hey, wait, I'm on the run. Because he stops and he's like, wait a second.
Yeah. Didn't you? Where? Huh?
She lied to me. Wait a second. One of my girls lied to me. She books out of town. She falls asleep on the side of the road where a cop finds her. The cop asks her if something's wrong, and she's like, am I acting like something's wrong? And he's like, yeah, actually, you're acting really weird.
Am I being suspect? Is it awkward? Am I being awkward? I'm just like, Jesus Christ, Marion. Just, my God, I'd put you in prison just because I'd be suspicious of you. Yeah,
take a breath. Just take a breath, Marion. You got to act. You got to be cool, all right? You got to be cool if you're going to pull this off. So, yeah, she drives away. He follows her for a little bit. And she ends up, like, pulling off into the next town, drives up to a used car dealership. And the cop like finds her there. Like he stops following her, and then she goes here, and the cop finds her, and so she's there.
That's what she thinks.
Yeah, she's there to get a car to like switch out cars.
Yeah,
but the cop's there. He's there. He's gonna see the car you drive away in. Right?
She's so bad at this.
She's bad.
She's so bad at this.
And she proceeds to be incredibly suspect with the car dealership guy too.
God.
Yeah.
You want to test the car out? Oh, you want to give it most people want to give it a day and a half. No, I'll just give me the car and I'll get out of here. Are you in trouble? Is someone chasing you?
Yeah.
No.
And I think in 1960, the only thing that keeps her from being locked up is that she's a pretty blonde woman. Everybody's like, well, God. Women don't commit crimes. So
holy crap.
If it was a guy, they'd like get a lynch mob after him. Like, this guy, we gotta, I don't care what he did. We're not even going to find out what he did.
Bitch.
Yeah. Just again, helping people, context for the time. She trades in her car for this new car, and the difference is $700.
Yeah. And she pays it in cash. In 1960.
1960.
Lady.
The cop pulls in as she pulls out, and she's in such a hurry, she almost leaves her stuff. Like, Come on, Marion. Come on, Marion. Step up your
So
game.
bad. So bad. It's like remember when you were like 8 years old in fourth grade and you had to go up and do a presentation and you would just like stumble and forget everything that you're supposed to do?
Yeah.
That's her.
That's her.
That is her.
She needed a better crime plan.
Good Lord.
So now, what's interesting after this is on her drive, and I actually think this is really savvy. I think what a lesser movie would do is cut back to the people at home that she left behind reacting to this stuff. That's not what we do. Instead,
Totally.
we stick with Marion in the car as she imagines what she thinks their responses would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's a savvy decision because it sticks with her and also doesn't have to be objectively true. It could just be what she thinks of true. Now we're learning more about her as a character and how she thinks other people perceive her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like that. And there's a part of me that every time I watch that movie and that scene comes up, I'm constantly having a back and forth in my head of, is Marion imagining the scenarios that are actually happening, you know, while she's gone? Or is part of that Hitchcock's way of just giving us the context of what is actually happening without having to actually show it, you know, which I like, because even though, you know, once we get to like later on in the movie and we start to see the perspective of the detective and the sister and the brother, the way it plays out, it really makes you think that like all those things that she was thinking of were probably the things that were actually happening.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
without having to cut to them, which I like. It's kind of, in a way, it's economic filmmaking too. And he does it multiple times. Like you'll see them talking about a road or a car will come by. You'll never see it. It's just like, oh, we flashed a light at Anthony Perkins to make it look like a car goes by.
I was thinking
we just
that
have
same
them point
scene.
to a street that we don't ever cut to because we're on the Universal Studios backline and it doesn't matter.
You're 100% right. He's like, yeah, this used to be the highway. Road off camera.
I don't need to see it. I don't give a shit. I know what a highway looks like. Sure.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think it is both. It's both those things because it is her imagining it. But also her life prior to this isn't terribly complicated, so she probably has a pretty solid understanding of how people would react to this situation. So she's driving, rain starts pouring, she pulls off to the Bates Motel. In the window of the house, she sees a woman. Oh, interesting. She honks her horn, and then Norman Bates comes out. This is our first introduction to Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates. He comes out to check her in. The establishment is empty. This is where we learned that, you know, it used to be by the highway. They moved the highway. Now they don't get any business. It's secluded. Nobody's going to know what's going on over here. She lies about her name, and she's supposed to like put down her home address, which was wild to me, but I guess you do that when you check in hotels anyway. It's just a different, you don't write it in a book. And she says LA because that's where she's headed, because that's where Sam is. Norman invites her into the home for dinner. So she won't have to go back in the rain to go find food. But this isn't going to work out because she hears a fight between Norman and his mother. Interesting. Meanwhile, she tries to hide the money, and she got a newspaper earlier, and she just like bundles the money in with the newspaper. Yeah, I guess fine.
Marion, we have a lot of things to figure out with you, girl.
You know who did a better job with this? It makes me think of No Country for Old Men. What is it, Llewellyn Moss, when he's hiding it in the vent? He was better at crime. Didn't work out for him, but he was better at it. Yeah, so she hears the argument with Norman and his mother. Norman comes with the food. You know, the rain clears up, and he brings the food to her. And he says, Mother isn't quite herself today. Is it because, whatever, spoilers. We're going to assume you've seen the movie and this isn't your first exposure to Psycho.
Oh, God, I hope not.
I hope not. Watch the movie before you listen to this. So they share dinner in the office. Behind the office, there's a parlor. He specifically calls it a parlor. I'm going to assume that's not an accident. Come into my parlor, said the spider to the fly. So this is one of multiple scenes where this happens a couple times with Norman, where it's just a conversation. Like the movie just stops and has these characters talk about their thoughts, their feelings, their perceptions on different situations. Specifically, we get a lot of things here, but specifically about Norman's mom. And I eat the shit up. I love it. And I think this is a good opportunity to bring up what I find really interesting about Anthony Perkins in this role is, Everybody does a good job in this movie. But I will say, other than Anthony Perkins, all the other actors are doing, if you've watched movies from the 40s and 50s, they're doing acting. I am enunciating my things. Anthony Perkins is coming in with a completely different energy. He's more naturalistic. He seems like more of like a person that you would meet. And I think it totally works. I don't know that I've seen Anthony Perkins in any other movies. So I don't know if he's more like method, more new school. I don't know what his deal is, but that's the vibe he comes in with. And considering what he represents in this movie, the fact that his energy is just a 180 from everybody else totally works.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I also love the way that that scene, that conversation with him and Marion is also the way it's shot. Because it starts out with the camera being very level to each of their faces, and we're just cutting in between the two. And then as you start to sort of see Norman's brain sort of like unlock, and you start to really get into the deep crevices of like his thought process. Yeah. And there's something kind of unhinged about the way he like describes things. We get to a low angle and it's pointing up, and we've got that enormous owl in the corner, and it's all lit from the bottom up. And it just has this like, immediately has this more menacing sort of feel. And that there's something that is something amiss with this character. You can't trust him. Yeah. And he's really selling it because, like you're saying, he comes off very natural. His emotions get sort of stronger and stronger and stronger as the conversation goes on, and it starts getting a little bit personal, talking about his mother, and he just really sells it. And then he has moments where he kind of snaps out of it. Yeah. And maybe he has a self-realization of, maybe I'm going in too much of a dark place, or there's something happening. Like the chemistry in my brain is rewiring, but it's so well played. And like you're saying, it is a complete 180. And I feel like I do feel like there's some intention behind this. I feel like the main character, or the main sort of focus of the movie, also starts to shift as soon as we get through that conversation with Marion and Norman. And
obviously we get a bigger break in that in a few minutes. But yeah, I think it's a really smart, especially when you bring up him kind of bringing himself back, because I think it's, especially post this movie, we've got a lot of movies with serial killer adjacent characters, and I think a lot of times actors can fall in the trap of playing crazy, and Anthony Perkins doesn't do that. It's like he's even as a character, Norman has to play at being a normal person, or at least be normal enough to operate around people.
He's aware. He seems to be kind of aware of his like boundary line.
Yeah, it's great. It's a really good performance, and I don't think it's an accident that our lead right now is Marion Crane, which is a bird, and all the taxidermy in the room is birds. He specifically talks about how he prefers stuffing birds.
God, so unhinged.
Yeah. Yeah, man, dude, the second you're in the taxidermy room, you're like, you know what? The rain's cleared up. Yeah, I think I'm going to go. Thank you. Thanks for dinner. I think I'm out of here.
Thanks for dinner. Thanks for the sandwich. Thanks for the bread. I'm packing my car and I'm getting out of town. Bye.
In fact, you know what? I'm just going to take this meal with me if that's okay. I'll eat it on the road. I got places I got to be. I'm out of here.
Oh, my God. So great.
So, yeah, it's a really good scene. And like you said, they talk about his mom and stuff like that. And in this, another key thing that happens in this scene is because the way they phrase it is, he uses the phrase, "We are all in our private traps." And so something kind of unlocks in Marion where she finally realizes, I guess seeing his crazy, she's like, wait, I'm acting out of my goddamn mind. What am I doing? I'm not going to get away with this shit. So she decides that she is going to go back and kind of like mea culpa her way, hopefully into a better situation, which unfortunately looks like it would have worked. Which is wild, by the way. That like, yeah, she could just, I'm sorry, and everybody's like, it's okay.
Nowadays, no.
And when she's leaving, he says buyers, something that would prompt her to say, remind him of her name, and she says Marion Crane, which is not what she put down in the book. And he looks in the book, and my read of this is what in his mind he's like, oh, that's the moment like, oh, this bitch is dead. She's dead.
Totally.
Norman watches her through a peephole. It's not a subtle peephole either. It's a really obvious peephole.
Not at all. And I was trying, because I know that scene.
Yeah.
And I was trying to, like, when she's walking around the room, I'm like, where is the peephole? I don't really remember. And like you could chalk it up to the fact that there is the most like the loudest wallpaper pattern that is so distracting that you may not even notice it. But damn, they cut to his POV and it's like that big. I'm like, dude, you can see that from the other side. You can
see an eyeball. There's nothing. It's not like Scooby-Doo where it's in the eye of a portrait. Like it's just a hole in the wall with your eyeball in it.
Yeah, but I will say that the shot of like the level, the moment that I knew that the movie was starting to get incredibly uncomfortable and it slowly ramps up with the conversation that they have, it is that super, super close-up shot of Anthony Perkins' face looking through it. And it's got incredibly shallow depth of field. And all you can see is really just like the pupil of his eye.
Yeah.
And there's something still, after this many years, something so uncomfortable about that shot. Like you can tell, first of all, you can tell that this is not his first rodeo. He's done this before. And the intensity of the tightness of that shot, it feels so claustrophobic, and it just makes you feel so gross watching him watch her. And nothing really, like he doesn't really see anything too like sexual or anything too sort of like disturbing. She's like mostly just in a robe, and I know she gets undressed at one point, but the movie doesn't really show us that. But you can tell just like the fixation that he has on her, that it's like, it's so uncomfortable.
It's doing a lot with a little, especially, and obviously I think at the time it would have felt like a lot, like this would have seemed very scandalous, but you know, now as we're talking about slasher movies, so we're going to get into stuff that's a lot more gratuitous pretty quickly. But you're right in that, and I think it helps too, starting with Marion stealing the money puts us into a place of tension.
Totally.
And it's a good way to ramp things up, because functionally right next we have the iconic shower scene, and that's going to be our split point from Marion was our protagonist. And I can't imagine seeing this movie in the 60s and being like, I'm so sorry, did you just kill the main character of the movie? Halfway through the movie? This is the halfway point of the movie.
Oh my God, I know. I mean, I've seen it so many times, but rewatching it, you know, I literally the same thing. I had to look at the Blu-ray player and I was like, what minute are we in? We're 48 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
And I was thinking the same thing. I was like, if I was watching this in a theater in 1960 and I got 48 minutes into the movie and your lead is out.
Yeah.
What is this movie about now?
Yeah.
What's going to happen for the rest of this movie?
Well, and it's interesting how the two halves mirror each other, because it's Marion seeing she couldn't get away with stealing the money. Then we're following Norman. Can he get away with his murder? And it's interesting how like we start off with something that I feels big, but then we contextualize it like this is grand scheme of what's going on in the world. This is nothing. This is
totally. And for these two, this is like. This almost, once you get to the end of it, you know, it almost feels like this is just like daily routine for them.
Yeah.
You know, for her, this is a really big extreme that she's like going off.
Yeah.
But even her just sitting there and thinking about, you know, her scenario and her daily life and all that stuff, this is just routine for them. And it's really interesting to see how the stories parallel each other.
Yeah.
But it's done in such an incredible way. Yeah.
Yeah. So after this scene, we get Marion, this is important to note for the plot. She does some math on the money she spent and what she needs to return for the $40,000 that she then tears up and goes to flush in the toilet. That doesn't seem important, but it is. And then she goes to have a shower, and this is where we get the shower scene. And it's just interesting to watch how much they get away with. But then also how little is shown specifically, because the shower scene is good. We see Mother. And I don't know if it's probably not the first time we've done this, but for this show covering slasher movies, something that we're going to be seeing a lot more is the use of negative space over the shoulder. Anytime you're in a horror movie and there's negative space, like the character, your protagonist, your subject is like in a corner, and then there's all this space behind them, your eyes immediately drift like, what's going to come out? What's going to pop up over there?
Absolutely. And I do wonder, like, you know, not that there weren't other, you know, pre-Psycho, I'm not super familiar with like all of the horror that had come out.
Yeah.
And of course, there probably was use of negative space to sell all these things, but seeing it in this movie, it gives you like such a different feeling, because it's not like we haven't seen it in other horror movies.
Yeah.
But in this one in particular, because you have the curtain and it's so obscured, you literally can't make out what's coming toward her until the very last minute. It really, really makes you uncomfortable. It's done so well.
Well, and you get brief glimpses, you know, when we do a lot of quick cuts, which especially at the time is something you would have needed to do. We just barely avoid seeing certain stuff. Here's the part that got me. Like, that is a masterclass. Like, this is people have discussed it. There's probably been books written about just this scene. It lays out the rules of every movie we watch from here on out is going to pull not just from this movie, but from this scene and how it is done and how to do a slasher kill. One of only 2 in this movie, by the way.
Yeah.
But what kills me when it comes to like context at the time, and actually a scene I like more, because I eat this shit up, man. What happens after is, you know, she grabs the curtain and falls. Classic. Norman shows back up. And in Norman's mind, Norman didn't do this. Spoilers. And Norman immediately goes about trying to cover it up. And we live with that. It's not, we don't cut to another. We sit with Norman as he's like, okay, hold on. All right, I got to move the body. I want to put the body in the trunk. I got to clear the room. You know what I mean? All those things. But what kills me, just for what we're going to get later, is there's a shot of her on the ground with the tub, and there's just this one little dribble of blood. And I'm like, that's nuts, man. That is nuts, because there's a shot inside the bathtub that's a little bit bloodier. Yeah. But it's like in just a decade, this is going to be, once you get to Texas Chainsaw, it's going to be like, this is child's play, man.
It is literally a massacre. Well, and again, I think that's part of the reason why certain movies, and this one in particular, where it's so hard to classify it as a slasher in my brain, or like a horror film, because it is, for the time, it very much is. But it's like, to me, it's more of a thriller. It's more suspenseful, which Hitchcock was kind of mostly known for, was thrillers and suspense. Yeah. So I think part of that is also why I'm like, yeah, it's horror by like the standard of horror in 1960. But at this point, like, you could call it a thriller or a suspense film, and it, you know, it's equally that too. But yeah, it's so minimal. But I do think that in a lot of ways, that is also what makes that movie special, is that it pushed the boundary for sure for what 1960 kind of allowed, but it didn't go over the top. Like, I still feel like Hitchcock understood, this is as far as I need to go. I don't need to push it any farther, which I appreciate, which I think sometimes gets lost in a lot of other movies that we'll talk about. I think some movies still are able, like Halloween, spoiler, it does a really good job of also doing the least amount for the biggest impact. And I think sometimes that works to your advantage. For some movies, of course, like, you kind of need it because the way that the movie is set up, it calls for that. But I think a lot of times movies tend to overdo it, and they don't have that restraint that I feel like this movie, because of the time also, but also because Hitchcock knew, well, I know it's never been done before, so I don't need to do so much work for people to buy into it. I'll just do the minimum, make it visually compelling, and people will eat it up and they'll buy into it and they'll be terrified and they'll never want to take a shower again. Yeah, to the degree that I was reading, I don't know how true this is, but the actress that plays Marion, after she was fine filming the scene, apparently, is the story, after she saw the movie, she felt very vulnerable and never felt comfortable taking a shower again, which I thought, which is a bummer, but I thought was interesting. Yeah, totally agree. And I think, especially now, you're right, because a lot of the tension doesn't come from, because there's only the 2 kills, it comes from, again, the effort Norman has to do to cover it up. That's where, like, a lot of the tension, and will people be able to figure it out? So yeah, so he takes the body, puts it in the trunk of her car, cleans up the room, and a detail that I love. It's something that is, I had in my notes, is very Coen Brothers. Obviously, they pulled it from movies like this. He grabs the newspaper, thinking it's just a newspaper, and throws it in the trunk. And the trunk and the car goes into the swamp, and there goes the money. And it's like, I love that shit, man. I love it that it's like all this. It's very Fargo. All this chaos over money that doesn't even end up mattering. It doesn't. It's lost. It's just gone forever. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God. Okay. So now, pivot point on our movie. It's a completely different movie now. Sam is writing a letter. Poor Sam is writing a letter like, hey, You're right. It doesn't matter that I don't have money. We'll be happy together. Let's get together. Too late, Sam. Sorry, my guy.
Sorry, bud. You're on your own.
Marion's sister Lila shows up. We find out also a private investigator named Arbogast shows up. That guy, the second I saw that guy's face, I'm like, I have seen that guy. Either that guy or a guy that looks like that guy in a bunch of movies. I guess he's in 12 Angry Men, which I don't know in what universe I would ever cover 12 Angry Men for this channel, but it's one of my favorite movies. It's a great movie. It's such a good movie. So anyway, so now we get the setup for this next part, which is Sam, Lila, and specifically this PI trying to figure out what happened to the money. They say basically like, we're going to forgive her if she just gives the money back. No harm, no foul. Must have been nice. Must have been nice.
Jesus, man.
Oh, man. Before we live in the dystopian police state we're in now.
Yeah. Anyway,
he checks around a bunch of places. He ends up at Bates Motel. In the dialogue, we find out he stopped by a bunch of motels. Dude, this is another good scene. Just these conversation scenes where two different people are like they're working at opposite aims. Like, it's such a good story engine because the PI is trying to figure out like, hey, do you know about Marion? And Norman's like, I don't know shit about Marion, which of course he does. And like
also. I just want to point out that PI went all the way from Phoenix into like somewhere into California before the LA Bakersfield split, went through all of those motels. That must have been insane. And then he casually tells Marion's sister, I'll be back about an hour. I'm like, didn't she go a lot further than that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
it doesn't matter.
Lila's with Sam, who's in California where Marion was going.
Yeah.
So I
guess that would make sense. It'll be an hour away.
Yeah. And especially then, traffic's different then. You know what I mean? It's a different
old highway. Who cares?
Old highway. But yeah, so Arbogast is interrogating Norman, and Norman, despite this not being his first rodeo, is also not the best at covering his tracks.
My God, everyone in this movie is so like they love to just out themselves.
Yeah, because it's one of those like, oh, nobody's been by in weeks, and then they keep talking and like, oh, a couple did mention this and this. And he's like. The PI is like, wait, so a couple stopped by? He's like, oh, yeah. Well, yeah. And he's like, can I look at your book? And it's like, yeah. And then he looks at Marion's name and he has a sample of her writing. And he's like, well, this looks like the woman. Can you want to look at the picture
look at the photo again?
And everyone's like, oh, I mean.
Yeah. Now that you bring it up, she looks familiar. I'm like, okay.
And then like later when he goes to, so after this whole conversation happens, Arbogast is like, he sees a woman in the window. He's like, I want to talk to this woman in the window. But when he calls Lila, he's like, I don't know if there's any more I can get out of this place. I'm like, what do you mean? He basically admitted to it.
Bro, he lied to your face and said he didn't see her. And then he looked at the picture after you called him out on the signature and he was like, Oh yeah. I'm like, well, Arbogast, I don't know if you're as good of a PI as you say you are.
As you say you are. The actor's really good, but I don't know if you've got the chops as a PI. So he goes into Arbogast. So Arbogast has this conversation with Norman, leaves. Norman smiles to himself like he got away with it, even though he like fumbled he just trips all over himself.
Fumbled the bag so bad.
Then Arbogast calls Lila, goes back. When he's sneaking around, when he goes back, he finds the taxidermy room, and then he goes into the house. As Arbogast is going up the stairs, this is staged great, by the way. He gets his face sliced open by the mom.
It's so good. And like, I love that it's so not concerned with the actual physics of how that would work.
Nope.
Hitchcock did not care.
Yeah.
I want that dude to get slashed in the face. I want a nice close-up on him. I want it to look really good, and I just want him to just like look like he's going down an escalator down the stairs.
Yep.
I don't care if it looks real. It looks great on camera.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit. And you're like, yeah, it's amazing.
Correct choice. That's the right choice. It's it's that idea of capturing the feeling of him falling, of what it felt like to him. And then we see him fall, and then and apparently this was restaged from the book. It didn't happen on the stairs, and it was a decision made to continue to help mask who the mother really is. Yeah. By putting Arbogast in, he's on stairs. It's a very vulnerable position. If you watch horror movies or specifically slashers, stairs will, and I've had friends that fall down the stairs. That shit will fuck you up. So I think it's a strong staging decision. And truthfully, it's kind of like, it's so funny because again, I've seen this movie before, but you kind of, once Marion goes, you're like, oh shit. Well, now that the big shock's out of the way, now we're going to follow how this crime gets solved. And so then when Arbogast gets got, you're like, oh, damn.
Yep.
I thought he was our new guy. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, like you were pointing out earlier, it's wild that it's really, yeah, it's these two kills. But the shower scene is iconic. And I feel like that is always, for the rest of history, going to be the scene that is associated with this movie because it was so shocking.
Yeah.
But even this murder, you know, they could have made it something really simple where he just gets knifed to the face and he collapses to the floor and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
But the fact that Hitchcock put in the effort to make it so visually dynamic that almost when you're watching, you almost want to like reach out and grab him and like catch him.
Yeah.
That is really cool to put in that like little extra bit of something into it to really make it feel that impactful and make it interesting is really cool. And I think it's just a huge testament to obviously the film itself, but also Hitchcock just as a creative filmmaker and how he like sees these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So after this, you know, like we talked about, Arbogast tells Lila he'll be there in an hour. He doesn't show up. So she wants to go to the hotel. Sam is like, I'm not going to let you go to the motel. I'm going to go to the motel. Yeah. Nobody's there because Norman is out by the swamp dumping Arbogast.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. So they go to the local sheriff, who isn't any help at all. I will say it's funny. And we just like, the Civil Rights Act is signed this year, so we're in the middle of the civil rights movement and everything. And I think you can feel, even though it doesn't touch on any of the civil rights stuff, the cultural change. This movie does feel like a snapshot that there is a cultural change happening. We're going out of the Hays Code, things are changing, and so I wonder if that informs the fact that it feels like there's a strong ACAB undercurrent in this movie, because the sheriff is not like, we got the cop earlier. This sheriff is like, I don't know. Norman seems like a nice boy. I'm sure it's fine. Yeah. Even after this is where we get the reveal. They're like, well, Arbogast mentions the old woman, and he's like, old woman, Norman's mom's been dead for 10 years. What are you talking about?
But I even love the build up to that because Loomis keeps mentioning the mom, and you see the sheriff and the wife
going like, wait, what? Yeah.
And as if you've never seen the movie before, you know, you're hopefully picking up on the like, why are they? Why? What is this? What's happening here? Yeah. And then that reveal, and of course, immediately you think like, I mean, anything is possible, right? You start thinking like, is it somebody else? Is it? I don't know if immediately you're gonna think like it's a corpse or it's someone else impersonating. Yeah. You know, it's fun. I would never watch Psycho with someone who's never seen Psycho, and I think it would be so interesting to sit someone down and to like try to figure out like, what are you thinking about? What do you think is happening? What do you? Because my girlfriend, funny enough, she had seen the movie before, and we get past the point where Arbogast is murdered, and she's like, I don't remember any of this. I don't. And I was like, you know how it ends, right? Like, you know what happens, right? She goes, yeah, I know like the revelation, like I know how it resolves, but none of this looks familiar to me. So I was like, damn, I really wish that you had not known the ending just so I could try to pick your brain on this right now.
Yeah, I feel like in 2024, it would be impossible now. You'd be like, well, Norman's the mom. Right, like Norman, that's what's happening. But it is in 1960, like that probably isn't even on people's radar. So I wonder what they think. And so they're probably thinking, especially, and I might be in the context of Universal movie. I'm thinking Universal Monsters, Dracula, the Mummy, yada yada. That they might be like, is it a ghost? Is there a ghost? Is Ghost Mom killing people?
Right.
It's darker than that, my babies. All right, so. Lila's convinced, I love this too, like the characters in the movie can't conceive of what's happening. Lila's convinced that Norman stole the money. She's like, the motel's off the highway, they're not making money anymore, he must have stolen the money. Which tracks, actually. That's a pretty good assumption. It's incorrect, but it is reasonable. So they go, Lila and Sam go in to check in as a couple. They use this as an opportunity to like case the joint. They find in room 1 a little scrap of Marion's math homework that she dumped down the toilet. And so they decide to split up. Sam's going to distract Norman. Lila's going to go in the house, and he's like, what if the mom's in there? And she's like, I can handle an old woman, which is hilarious. So yeah, Sam's talking up Norman. And again, they cut back and forth, but like again, with people not being able to show, being incapable of not showing their cards, Sam is like immediately on Norman's case. It's like, my guy, you're supposed to distract him, not be like, well, I know what you did.
Yeah, it went from like pretty normal convo to so the money, you did it for the money, right?
Yeah.
Everything you did for the money, and you're like, you went from 0 to 100 so fast.
Yeah, each time we cut back to Sam, he's escalated, and it's like, you need to slow roll this, dude. You need to. So eventually, Norman knocks out Sam and runs in the house once he kind of figures out what they're doing. But as Lila's, I like this movie, man. It makes smart choices. So she's going through the house. She ends up finding Norman's old room. It's untouched. It's basically the same as he was. One assumes it's the same as he was, as it was when he was a kid. She finds a book that she doesn't open. Apparently, this is a reference to something in the book that this is based off of. That in the book, she finds hardcore pornography, or like, let's say taboo pornography.
Yeah.
I kind of love that we don't do that here. I think leaving that stuff, again, it's that less is more. Like the less,
yeah.
And it's same with Anthony Perkins' performance, him not playing crazy. You know what I mean? He just looks kind of like an awkward dude until, he starts murdering people.
Yeah.
So she goes down into the cellar. There's an earlier shot where Norman takes his mother. We see Norman carrying something down into the cellar, and she finds Norman's mother, which is a desiccated corpse. It is still, to this day, you're like, that leaves an impression. That leaves an impression.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, still to this day.
Yeah. So Norman shows up dressed like his mom to kill Lila. That's a quick costume change.
Right.
And Sam shows up and stops him. We cut a little bit forward in time to the police station. And we have the most hard-boiled psychiatrist I've ever seen. This guy is like coming in like, here's the deal. See, I interrogated the parents. I'm like, this guy's a therapist? He looks like he's going to like third degree your ass, man. Like what's...
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. And he lays it out. And it's funny too. Like I think in another movie, like having a guy come in that we've never met in the movie and be like, here's the plot of the movie. Wouldn't work. For some reason it does work. I don't know why. Maybe it's just your brain's in a different time. I don't know.
Yeah, and I almost forget how like long that scene is too.
Yeah.
Like it's an enormous info dump.
Yes.
And rewatching that, I was sitting there going, I don't think that this would fly now in a movie.
No.
I feel like the audience would almost be, I don't know if they actually would be, but I feel like their sort of like emotional reaction to that would be, I'm so offended that you think I need this explanation.
Yeah.
And maybe in 1960 it was, I think maybe people might have had a different reaction to that. Maybe they appreciated it because they're still trying to pick up all the pieces, because they're trying to like figure out exactly what's been happening. Okay, why is Norman in a dress?
Yeah.
And they even, in the movie, they even bring it up as like, oh, it's because he's a transvestite. And it's like, well, no, he's not.
I was actually genuinely surprised by that moment. It's not like huge, but the fact that the movie stops and he's like, actually, that's not what's happening.
Right.
Don't compare it to that. I'm like, not bad. 1960s slasher movie, feeling the need to, just because some of the movies we might cover don't feel the need to make that distinction. Like,
not at all. Yeah, absolutely.
That just because somebody's dressing up as a woman doesn't mean they're a serial killer. This is a different thing. Yeah.
So I did find that really, really interesting that the movie takes like, it feels 5 minutes. It might be less. It might be 2.5, 3 minutes, but it's a very meaty dialogue sequence to really re-explain everything that we just witnessed, but also give huge context and huge revelations. Oh, Norman's mother didn't poison the boyfriend. It was Norman that did all of it.
He killed the mom and the boyfriend.
All those sorts of things. So it really helps kind of like full circle the movie and really explain and give context to Norman's world and just how twisted and demented it is. Yeah. Oh yeah, like this dude straight up is like, has one body that is containing two very different personalities, but one has fully taken over. Yeah. So it's really interesting to also kind of see like, and obviously this is coming from the book, but to just kind of see what they thought that type of a character would be like in that time and era. There's really no like, there's no real like medical sort of science behind it, but it's really interesting to see like someone really came up with something that is pretty unique and interesting and is pretty twisted, but it works so incredibly well that the way that it's explained, you go, okay, yeah, I believe that. I buy into that. I'm not questioning it at all, really.
Yeah, totally. Did you ever watch, because I think I watched a few episodes from the first season. Did you ever watch that Bates Motel show?
I did not, but I've heard really good things about it.
I watched a little bit of it, and I remember at the time I felt like, I mean, do we need a prequel show about Psycho? And then watching this again, I'm like, oh, I see why you would, because there's so much backstory here. I see why you would watch this movie and be like, no, you could make a show out of this. You could make a show out of this relationship. So yeah, like you said, that Norman murdered his mother and her lover. The therapist has this line that says, matricide is the most unbearable crime of all. I'm like, I don't know. It's bad, but is it the most unbearable? I don't know. And so Norman exhumed his mother's body and was keeping it this whole time, using his taxidermy stuff to make it like not as bad, I guess. I have in my notes, there's a lot of pop psychology here, but like you said, it worked. Within the context of the movie, you're like, yeah, I buy this. Yeah. And it all builds to a moment. It's so funny. This cop comes in and is like, he's got a chill. Do you want to give him a blanket? And they're like, yeah, sure, give him a blanket. I'm like, this guy's murdered multiple people, because they ask him, and the thing that we know about the 2 murders on the camera, and they're like, have you had any unsolved cases? And one of the guys is like, yeah, actually we have. He's like, you might want to look into that swamp some more. And it's like, so wow. But they're like, yeah, sure, give him a blanket, which you should give your prisoners blankets. It's just, you'd think the 60s would be a little bit harsher than now. And I guess in some ways it's not. Anyway, so they go to bring him a blanket, and I think next to the shower scene, this end scene is up there with iconic. It's this slow push in on Norman as Mom's talking in his head about like, yeah, I'm going to show him. I'm going to show him that like, I'm going to be the chillest prison of all. I'm going to show him the line. I think the line, something along the lines of like, they'll say she wouldn't even hurt a fly. And again, I've watched the movie, but it's like, man, this creeps me out. This is creepy. This still works. This still works.
Yeah.
And that's the end of Psycho, everybody. The end. I was going to say roll credits, but as we established earlier, nope. The movie
there are no credits. It literally just says the end, and then it ends.
Then you're out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that final scene is so incredibly. And the thing that I also appreciate about the movie is that movie very easily could have at the end had Anthony Perkins do the lip sync and then have it VO'd.
Yeah,
and I love that it's all just internal. Everything is internal. The whole monologue is internal.
Yeah.
And anytime we see Mother talk, it's always off screen. Even when the cop goes in to hand him the blanket because he's cold. Yeah. Thank you. And it's all just, I love that so much, because I think it very easily, you could have watched that and gone, well, now it's just silly. Yeah. Now it's ridiculous. Yeah. But the fact that they leave that all internal, it's all in Norman's head, except for when it's off screen, it works so incredibly well, and it keeps it really creepy.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it brings up something I hadn't really thought about, but I think there's something to this movie about people's interiority. Because when Marion is thinking about people's reactions when she's driving, we mentioned that earlier, and it's all about, oh, I never thought she would do this. No, she's trustworthy. And it's one of those things, and I think that's laying the seeds for, like, you don't really know what people are capable of. Everybody has their own interior life, and you don't really know what people are capable of, which I wonder how novel a concept that was. Maybe it wasn't at all, but I know that especially post Manson, like growing up in the 80s, big stranger danger, satanic panic, everybody's kind of out, a lot of paranoia. Yeah. And you kind of feel like this is kind of laying the groundwork of that. Like, you don't know what's in people's hearts. You don't know what's in their heads. You're looking at Norman Bates, but in his mind, it's Mother. And it's like, that's compelling. That's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Yeah. And it's also interesting to see like what movies end up borrowing so many things from this movie. And it's a movie that's based on a book. Yep. But it's that visual language that Hitchcock gives it that I think it becomes so influential in other stuff. And even rewatching it, truthfully, I'm rewatching, I'm going, even the soundtrack. Like, I'm listening to the soundtrack by Bernard Herrmann, and I'm thinking to myself, this sounds a lot like the theme song from Friday the 13th.
Well, when we get to Friday the 13th, especially the first one. The first one,
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's great stuff.
Yep, that, and when it comes to once we get to Texas Chainsaw, the Ed Gein stuff. Anyway, that's Psycho, everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us in our discussion on that movie. It was really great to revisit. My only concern was like, oh man, did we start with the bar too high? Did we start? But But I'm so excited to go on this journey with you, Adam, with you guys in the audience as well. And we're going to be doing this every month with a different slasher movie, working through the ages. Let us know, you know, spoilers, we're going to do the hits. Texas Chainsaw, Friday the 13th, Freddy, all that stuff. But if maybe there's some that are outside of, you know, the mainstream consciousness, feel free to drop those suggestions in the comments. Maybe we'll hit those movies up. Adam, remind the kids at home where they can find you.
You can just find me on all my social media. It's just at Adam Hlavac, which is my name. I'm boring like that. Also on Heroes Reforged every week, we're doing reactions to stuff. I'm super excited to be doing this. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. This is going to be a lot of fun. And already, just during the conversation, I was already like looking up things that come out around Psycho that I'm like, you know, I think I'm going to give this movie a watch.
Yep.
Just a perfect example. Peeping Tom came out the same year as Psycho, and a lot of people would like to classify that movie and this movie as like sort of the beginning of the slasher era. So I'm like, you know what? I might pick it up on Criterion and give it a watch. Why not?
Yeah, I'm excited to do that as well. Again, like, give us those suggestions in the comments. You can find me at DJ Talks Trash. We do a bunch of stuff here at Only Stupid Answers. I got Mutant Academy with Sal, Spider-Versity if you're over on the Patreon. Roxy and I cover everything that's going on TV and other and movies and all that stuff. And of course, don't forget to go to hellbentcomicbook.com and back the Kickstarter for the Hellbent Complete Edition. Independent comics like this cannot exist without your support. I'm truly thankful to everybody that has already shown up and everybody that is about to show up. Thank you so much. We only have a few days left. We are funded, but we are working towards our stretch goals. So please help us do that by going to hellbentcomicbook.com. We will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.